It was long past midnight when I found myself staring at the faded photograph of my husband, the man I lost decades ago to cancer. My name is Eleanor Price. I'm 67, and for most of my life I carried a secret heavier than any burden, the secret of how I built my son's world with my own 2 hands. When James was just 7 years old, I buried his father, and with him, any dream of an easy life. From that day forward, it was me against the world. I scrubbed other people's floors, bagged groceries under fluorescent lights, stitched torn shirts until my fingers bled. Peanut butter sandwiches became our staple meal, but James never once complained. Every night, he would look at me with those tired little eyes and whisper, "Mama, when I grow up, I'll take care of you." I believed him with every ounce of my weary heart. Years passed, and my boy blossomed into a man who earned scholarships, degrees, and finally, a career in finance. I watched from the shadows, my chest swelling with pride as he shook hands with bosses and built a life I could never give him. And when he met Olivia, a polished woman with perfect hair and a smile that never reached her eyes, I knew he had stepped into a world far from the one I had bled for. But here's what no one knew, what no one ever suspected. The roof over their heads, the house they bragged about, wasn't built on their success. It was built on my sacrifice. I drained every dollar my late husband left, every dime I saved in silence, and placed it beneath their feet like a foundation they never even noticed. Snow had started to fall early that December, the kind of snow that blankets the ground in silence, making every step sound louder than it should. I remember standing at my window, watching the flakes drift lazily down under the streetlight, waiting for my phone to ring. It didn't. For decades, Christmas had meant one thing: family. And family always gathered around me. When James was little, we couldn't afford store-bought decorations, so we cut paper snowflakes and taped them to the walls. I baked cinnamon cookies from scratch, and our whole house smelled like sugar and spice. Even when times were hard, I strung dollar store lights along our roof, their cheap bulbs glowing like hope against the darkness. James never missed a single Christmas. Not one. But now there was silence. December 20th came and went. No calls, no texts. December 22nd, nothing. The loneliness pressed in like cold air slipping under a locked door. Finally, I dialed James myself. His voice was quick, distracted. He mumbled something about still making plans, and that Olivia's family might be hosting. He said, "We'll let you know." Those words echoed in my chest like a cruel joke. "We'll let you know?" That wasn't how we did Christmas. I was the one who made it happen. I was Christmas. On the evening of December 23rd, my phone buzzed. Not James. Olivia. A text so short it barely took a second to read. "Hey, we're keeping it small this year. Just immediate family." I froze. I read it once, then again. My hands shook as the words sliced deeper with each repetition. Immediate family. My apron was still dusted with flour, the pie cooling on the counter, the neatly wrapped gifts for the grandchildren stacked by the door. And yet, in her eyes, in their eyes, I wasn't family at all. I whispered the words to myself in disbelief. Just immediate family. A wave of humiliation hit me so hard my knees nearly buckled. I had given them everything, every cent, every ounce of energy, every dream I buried so theirs could rise. And in return, I was erased with one text message. On Christmas Eve, I pulled on my heavy coat and walked. I didn't want to show up uninvited, didn't want to beg for a seat at the table I had bought for them. I just needed air, needed to remind myself that I was still alive even if I felt invisible. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked the 5 familiar blocks to their house. When I reached their street, I stopped cold. The house glowed like a Christmas card, lights draped across every window, a wreath on the door, music spilling through the glass. Laughter echoed. The smell of turkey floated into the night. My breath caught in my throat. Through the big front window, I saw them. James, Olivia, friends, neighbors, maybe even her relatives. Glasses of wine raised, smiles wide. Children laughing. A party. A grand, beautiful party. The kind of party I used to host when James was small, the kind of party I thought we'd still share forever. But I wasn't inside. I was outside, in the cold, staring in like a stranger. Then came the final knife. Mrs. Dunlap, their neighbor across the street, dragged her trash can to the curb. She spotted me and called out casually, "Big party tonight?" "Melissa said they're keeping it small this year, said your presence makes things uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. The word slammed into me harder than the freezing wind. I wasn't just excluded. I was a problem, an embarrassment, something to hide away so their new, polished life looked perfect to the world. I turned before she could say another word. My chest burned, but no tears came. Tears would mean weakness, and weakness was something Olivia wanted to see. I would not give her that satisfaction. I walked home slowly, the lights from their windows fading behind me. Every step felt like betrayal, but not mine, theirs. Back in my small house, I sat by my simple little tree, blinking white lights casting soft shadows on the walls. No ornaments from grandchildren, no handmade cards, just silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ribs and dares you to break. And in that silence, I made my decision. I walked to the back room, the place where I keep every important paper, every account number, every document they assumed I was too old to understand. I pulled out the thick folder labeled James and Olivia House. Inside were the trust papers, the account statements, the automatic payment slips. Proof that every brick, every beam of that house existed because of me. I had protected them long enough. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady, my voice even. When the banker asked if I wanted to stop the payments temporarily, I said no, permanently. Her voice was polite, professional. Mine was calm, almost cold. And just like that, the foundation beneath their perfect life began to crack. That night, I sat back down with a cup of cocoa gone cold and stared at my tree. I thought about every Christmas past, every moment of joy, every sacrifice I had made so they could live better. Then I thought of Olivia's text. Just immediate family. I smiled not out of happiness, but out of a strange, quiet satisfaction. They had forgotten who built their comfort, but they were about to remember. And as the snow continued to fall, I whispered to myself the truth I had ignored for too long. If they could cut me out of their family, then I could cut them off from the life I had paid for. This was not revenge. It was justice. The first days of January felt unusually still. The streets were quiet, the Christmas lights dimmed, and the world seemed to exhale after the chaos of the holidays. But inside my chest, a storm brewed, silent but deliberate. On New Year's Eve, I cooked myself a modest dinner, black-eyed peas for luck, cornbread warm from the oven, and a splash of sparkling cider. I sat alone in my chair, the television counting down to midnight, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt powerful. For once, I wasn't waiting by the phone, hoping for an invitation. I had already taken back the one thing that gave me leverage, the roof over their heads. The peace didn't last long. By January 2nd, my phone rang, James's name flashing across the screen. I let it buzz twice before answering, my voice calm. "Mom," he said. No greeting, no warmth. His voice was tight, panicked. Did you do something with the mortgage?" I took a slow sip of tea. "Hello to you too, James. How are you?" "Mom, please. The bank sent us a letter. They said the payment stopped. We're behind. How is that even possible?" I let the silence stretch, heavy as lead. Then I spoke softly, the way a judge might when delivering a sentence. "I thought you said I wasn't immediate family." He sucked in a breath, like the words had punched him. For the first time, I heard fear in my son's voice. He tried to scramble, excuses tumbling from his mouth, stress, misunderstandings. Maybe Olivia had said something she didn't mean. But I stopped him. "If I'm not family enough to sit at your table," I said, steady and low, "then I'm not important enough to pay for it either." There was silence on the line, broken only by his shallow breathing. Finally, he whispered, "Why didn't you tell me? All these years, why didn't you say something?" "Because I wanted you to feel strong," I replied. "Because I wanted her to feel like she built something with you. But pride without gratitude is empty noise, and I've grown tired of the noise." He begged then, his voice stripped of authority. "Mom, please, we'll figure it out, but maybe you can help us. Just until—" I cut him off gently. "I didn't call the bank to destroy you, James. I called them to remind myself that I am not powerless. I'm not just the old woman you forgot. I'm the foundation you built on, and foundations can shift. I hung up before he could reply. The days that followed were quiet on my end, but I knew chaos was erupting in theirs. The house that had once seemed like a trophy now became an anchor, dragging them into panic. Lawyers were consulted, papers dug through, truths uncovered. It wasn't long before I heard the knock sharp, furious, demanding. When I opened the door, Olivia stood there, her eyes burning, her jaw tight. She stormed in without waiting, her coat half-zipped like she hadn't even finished dressing before rushing over. "You're ruining our lives!" she snapped, her voice slicing through the room. I sat down in my chair, the same one where I had once rocked James to sleep when he was sick, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I didn't flinch. "No, dear," I said with deliberate calm. "You removed me from your life. I'm simply respecting your decision." Her face twisted. She wanted a fight, wanted me to shout so she could feel justified, but I refused to give her that. My quiet unnerved her more than anger ever could. "You're punishing us because of Christmas," she spat, pacing my living room like it belonged to her. "Because we didn't invite you. You're tearing everything down out of spite." I tilted my head. "I didn't tear down your house. I simply stopped holding it up." Her voice cracked then, the mask of fury slipping just enough to reveal fear. "We can't afford it without those payments. We have children. Do you want us to lose everything?" "You seemed to manage just fine last month," I replied, my tone almost gentle. "Decorating, hosting parties, drinking wine. You didn't need me then. I trust you'll figure it out now." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. She stood frozen, her mouth opening but no words coming out. Because what could she say? That I was cruel? That I was selfish? No accusation could erase the truth. The life they flaunted was built on my invisible sacrifice. When she finally turned to leave, she muttered, "You'll regret this." I walked her to the door, my voice steady as stone. "Good luck with next month's house payment, and the one after that." I shut the door softly, but the sound echoed like thunder. For the first time in years, I felt no need to chase approval, no need to beg for inclusion. I sat back down, tea still warm, peace wrapping around me like a blanket. But I knew the storm wasn't over. Because when people lose what they've taken for granted, they don't apologize. Not at first. They fight. They blame. And I could feel the weight of their desperation building, pressing against my quiet resolve like waves against a cliff. What they didn't realize was this: cliffs don't move, they break waves. And I was done moving. The days that followed Olivia's furious visit were unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels more like the pause before thunder than peace. I went about my routines, making tea, feeding the birds, tending to my frostbitten garden, but underneath it all, I could feel something building. And then came the second knock. It was evening, the sun long gone, when the sharp rapping rattled my front door. Not polite, not hesitant, demanding. I opened it, and there she stood again, Olivia, her hair pulled back so tight it made her expression harsher, her coat still unbuttoned as though she'd sprinted here without thinking. Her eyes gleamed with fury, but beneath it, I saw something else: panic. She pushed past me into the living room, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. "Do you realize what you've done?" she spat, her voice trembling between rage and fear. I closed the door slowly, deliberately, then turned to face her. "Yes," I said simply. Her composure cracked. "The bank called again. They said if we don't make the payment by the 15th, we'll default. Do you understand? We could lose the house, our house." "Our?" I echoed, my tone calm, almost curious. "Funny choice of words. That house was never yours. It was a gift paid for in silence. Every brick, every beam was bought with money you never asked where it came from. And now you want to claim it as yours?" Her hands shook, but she balled them into fists. "You're cruel. You're punishing us because you weren't invited to one Christmas dinner." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands neatly. "No, Olivia. I'm reminding you of the truth you've chosen to ignore. You cut me out of your life. You told me without words, but with actions that I wasn't welcome in your world. So I stepped out. From the table, from the house, from the payments. I'm only respecting your boundaries." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Olivia's chest heaved, her lips parting as though she had a retort ready, but nothing came. For once, she wasn't in control. Her voice finally broke, thinner now, no longer the sharp blade she wielded so easily. "We can't afford it. James's salary doesn't cover everything. We'll drown without that support. What about the children? Don't you care about them?" That struck a nerve, but not the way she expected. I tilted my head, my voice soft but unwavering. I cared enough to sacrifice decades of my life so they could have comfort. I cared enough to pour every penny into the roof over their heads. I cared enough to let you smile in photographs as though you built it all yourselves. But caring doesn't mean being invisible forever. My love isn't an endless bank account, Olivia, and my silence isn't weakness. Her eyes filled with something that looked like fear or perhaps recognition. For the first time, she realized the ground she stood on wasn't solid. It was borrowed, and I had taken it back. She spun toward the door, her fury reigniting as though anger could shield her from truth. "You'll regret this. You'll be all alone. No one will stand by you when you need them." I walked her to the porch, my steps steady, my gaze unblinking. I've been alone before, and I survived. But you, Olivia, you've never stood without someone holding you up. Let's see how you manage. I let the cold night air sweep between us before I added, quiet but sharp as a blade, "Good luck with the next payment." Then I closed the door. The latch clicked, and just like that, the storm was outside again, where it belonged. 2 days later, the knock came again, but this one was different. Softer, almost hesitant. I opened the door, and there stood James, alone. No polished coat, no tight jaw. Just a man who looked more like the boy I once tucked into bed than the husband who had let me be erased. His eyes were rimmed red, his shoulders slumped. "Mom," he whispered, voice breaking. I didn't know. I stepped aside, letting him in. He sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly as though holding himself together. I brewed tea out of habit, the kettle whistling in the background while silence filled the room. "You didn't ask," I said finally, placing the cup in front of him. He blinked, confused. "What?" I leaned forward, my gaze steady. "You never asked where the money came from. You never wondered how a woman who worked 2 jobs and lived in a modest house could quietly vanish into the background while you thrived. You never looked back to see if I was still holding you up. James, that was the real betrayal." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. His voice was raw. "I thought you were just okay, that you had enough. I didn't think." "That's right," I cut in, my voice cool. "You didn't think." The words hung heavy between us. He looked down at his hands, shame flooding his face. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't mine to bear. It was his. "Finally," he whispered, "I'll fix it. I'll talk to her. I'll make her understand. Please, don't give up on us." I shook my head slowly. "This isn't about her, or the house. It's about you, James. You let me disappear into the shadows because it was easier than facing the truth. You built your life on my sacrifice, and then let her tell you I didn't belong. That wound won't be healed with promises." He lifted his head, eyes glistening. "What do you want me to do?" I sipped my tea, the warmth steadying me. "I want you to remember. Not the mortgage, not the papers, not the money. I want you to remember the woman who worked through the night so you could have shoes for school, the woman who fed you when she was hungry herself, the woman who told you every night that you were loved, even when the world was cruel. That's who I am, and if you can't remember her, then no amount of fixing will matter." His lips trembled. "Can I come back? Not to ask for money, not to demand anything, just as your son?" I let the silence linger, not as punishment, but as proof that forgiveness is not a switch to be flipped. Finally, I nodded once. "We'll start with just you, not her, you." He nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks as he stood. At the door, he paused, turning back to me with the faintest ghost of a smile. "You were always the strongest one, weren't you?" I didn't answer. He already knew. As the door closed behind him, I returned to my chair by the window. Outside, the garden lay sleeping under frost, but I knew the rose bush Eleanor's grace would bloom again come spring. Strength, after all, never really dies. It waits. The weeks slipped by like melted snow running into the gutter, carrying the remnants of the holidays away. January became February, and though the frost still clung to the ground, I could feel the season shifting. The light stretched a little longer each evening, and the birds returned to my garden, pecking at the seeds I left out for them. On the surface, life was ordinary. I woke early, made tea, read my books, tended to my plants even when the soil was too hard to yield. But beneath the surface, a change had rooted itself deep inside me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting. Not for a call, not for an invitation, not for scraps of affection that came wrapped in cold smiles. The ache was still there, betrayal leaves bruises that time alone cannot heal, but I wasn't powerless anymore. I had reclaimed what was mine, my dignity, my strength, my voice, even if it spoke only in whispers. And then one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the oak tree in my yard, there was another knock, soft this time, hesitant. I opened the door to see James again, alone. No, Olivia. He looked smaller than before, shoulders bent, as though the weight of his choices pressed down harder each day. "Mom," he said, his voice fragile, "I've been thinking about everything." I stepped aside, letting him in. He sat gingerly on the couch, his eyes scanning the familiar room, perhaps seeing it for the first time as more than the backdrop to his childhood. I made tea, always tea, and we sat across from each other in silence until the steam between us softened the air. "You were right," he said finally. "About me. About how I never asked, never wondered. I just assumed you'd always be there. I let her." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I let her tell me who you were to us, and I didn't fight for you. That's on me." I studied him carefully. He was my son, my boy, who once whispered promises into the dark, who once believed he could take care of me. Somewhere along the way, that boy had been buried beneath ambition, pride, and someone else's vision of a perfect life. But now, sitting in front of me, I saw fragments of him breaking through. "I don't want your money," he continued. "I don't want your sacrifices. I want to make it right, to be your son again." My chest tightened. A part of me longed to rush into his arms, to erase the years of distance with forgiveness. But another part, the part scarred by silence and exclusion, knew that healing doesn't come cheap. It takes time. It takes effort. And most of all, it takes truth. "Words are easy," I said softly. "Actions will tell me who you really are." He nodded, tears brimming. "Then let me prove it, little by little, if you'll let me." I gave him a single nod. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door left ajar. The days moved forward, and James began to return not every day, not with grand gestures, but with small visits. He came on a Saturday afternoon to fix a creaky step on my porch. On a Tuesday evening, he sat with me through supper, eating beans and cornbread without complaint. Once, he even brought me a book he thought I'd like, its spine still stiff, the receipt tucked inside. Olivia never came, not once, and I didn't ask for her. My home was no longer a stage for appearances or a place where I had to shrink myself to fit someone else's comfort. It was mine, and only those who respected it were welcome. James's efforts didn't erase the past, but they began to lay bricks for something new, something fragile, yes, but real. Still, I knew better than to believe all wounds would heal. Some scars remain, not as pain but as reminders. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering all the years I carried them in silence, every check I wrote, every meal I skipped so James could have more, every Christmas when my hands smelled of cinnamon and my heart beat with hope. And I remembered too the look on Olivia's face when she told me I wasn't welcome, the sharp sting of being erased, the word uncomfortable echoing like a curse. But instead of letting the memory break me, I let it shape me. I had learned a hard truth. Sometimes the people you give everything to will be the first to forget you. They will rewrite the story without your name in it, as though your sacrifices were just background noise. But I had also learned something else. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Silence doesn't mean powerless. Walking away doesn't mean defeated. When I stopped the payments, I didn't destroy their lives. I simply stopped holding them up. And in that choice, I found freedom. By spring, the frost began to lift. My rose bush, Eleanor's Grace, bloomed crimson against the fence, its petals opening defiantly toward the Sunday. I sat by the window, sipping tea, watching its color spread like fire across the garden. James visited that afternoon. He stood by the rose bush, hands in his pockets, studying it the way one studies something they've overlooked too long. "It's beautiful," he murmured. "It's strong," I corrected. "Beauty fades. Strength endures." He nodded, understanding more than my words. Inside, we sat again at the table, and for once, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was comfortable. Healing had begun, not complete, not perfect, but real. I never told the story publicly, not to my friends, not at church. But sometimes, when I sat alone in the quiet, I imagined telling it to others like me. People cast aside after giving everything. People made to feel small in the very lives they built. And if I could, I'd tell them this. When they push you out, when they call you unnecessary, when they act as though your love was a burden, don't beg. Don't cry at their doorstep. Don't hand over more of yourself to people who refuse to see your worth. Instead, stand tall in your silence. Let them feel the weight of your absence. Let them stumble without the invisible hands that steadied them for so long. Because the truth is, sometimes justice isn't loud. It doesn't come with shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes justice is quiet. It's the absence of help where gratitude never lived. It's the moment you stop bleeding for those who never bothered to notice your wounds. And in that quiet, you will find peace. Now, as I sit by my window watching the seasons change, I know this. They celebrated without me, but I survived without them. They erased me from their story, but I wrote my own. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe James and I will rebuild something lasting. Maybe we won't. But either way, I am no longer waiting for their permission to belong. I belong to myself. And that, after all these years, is enough.